Happy October, everyone. You know that means gonna get some candy, settle down, maybe watch a scary movie and what have you. In fact, I'll put on the scariest movie of them all, Pooh's Grand Adventure, The Search for Christopher Robin. Woo! But you know what? Everything's gonna be fine for our friends in the Haunted Acre Woods. Yes, that title is not misleading. It is not a lie, nor is it inaccurate. I was scared by a Winnie the Pooh related thing. One of the most wholesome, child-friendly characters and brands of all time. A bear that is full of stuff and fluff and is very nice. Frightened the bejesus out of me. And no, it has nothing to do with that forthcoming Blood and Honey film, which honestly to me looks like a mediocre one-joke SNL skit extended to feature length. There was once a Pooh story that, while on paper looked extremely child-friendly, actually harbored surprisingly dark thoughts and meanings, but in a very respectable package. To truly understand this, though, take yourself back to the viewpoint of a young child. When you are small, the world looks and sounds so much larger than it actually is. This means that even the littlest of things that are trying to be some level of frightening can scare you. A property like Winnie the Pooh is no different. And that's what today's subject, Pooh's Grand Adventure, is all about. Pooh's Grand Adventure was part of the Disney Toon direct-to-video lineup of the mid-90s and 2000s. It stands out in my mind among other Pooh-related stories because, unlike some of them, the film has much more of a way dangerous feel about itself. It's a surprisingly somber story packaged in a typical Winnie the Pooh vibe. Much like just about every other Winnie the Pooh story, there is no direct antagonist or villain, and instead the forceful villain of the story is implied, rather than actually ever shown. But you can betcha, as a 6-year-old, I didn't know that. Take this part of Owl's song Adventure is a Wonderful Thing, which is supposed to be an otherwise upbeat tune about how venturing into the unknown can sometimes be rewarding.
Through the quicksand and the chasms, tempting fate and fighting spasms.
Owl's rather cheerful vocals suddenly take on a much lower register. It sounds far less motivated and more concerned. The implication here is essentially that this is the most daunting and possibly the darkest quest that Pooh and friends are about to embark on, and have gone on. Unlike other Pooh stories, before or after, a character's life, in this case Christopher Robin's, is actually in potential mortal danger, and there's no implication to the audience if he's actually okay, as the movie makes the wise decision to have Christopher Robin completely missing from the movie after the opening sequence, thus setting off the titular quest. First, let's talk about Winnie the Pooh the character, and the brand in relation to dark stories. Most Pooh stories do not have regular antagonists. A. Milne did not write children's stories to be in the vein of, say, other classic literature of the past, where there's a clear antagonist or villain for the hero to foil. Instead, Milne's stories were more focused on teaching children classic lessons, and being more wholesome otherwise. If there was an antagonist of sorts in a Pooh story, mine, Disney, or otherwise, it often came more from misunderstanding or an element of nature, such as rain, wind, or maybe a snowfall. Most Pooh stories follow general standard and or repetitive plots. Pooh wants honey, Rabbit's house falls apart, Eeyore completely loses his tail, etc., etc. The shoe doesn't really fall from the branch in these scenarios. The actual implied antagonists, like Heffalumps and Woozles, are simply that, implied, and it is never once not brought to the audience's attention that these are imagined made-up characters from nightmares and dreams of Christopher Robin. Heffalumps, for example, never actually appeared directly in any A.L. Mine stories, and are instead reduced mostly to a dream sequence in the story in which Piglet met a Heffalump, and then implied in another. But they are memorable enough that they were kept in all subsequent Disney-related stories. Woozles are in similar categories, with the implication being that Piglet and Pooh like to hunt them. To give you another example, the movie Pooh's Grand Adventure, in this case, is said to be inspired by two A. Milne stories, in which Rabbit has a busy day when we learn what Christopher Robin does in the mornings, and in which Christopher Robin come to an enchanted place and we leave them there. In the first, Rabbit goes to meet Christopher Robin and finds that he isn't there. This turns into a minor misunderstanding as the gang discovers what Christopher Robin does when he basically has no time to play with them. The later is more interesting because it's actually the last chapter in the book, The House at Pooh's Corner. And it is more about Pooh and Christopher Robin coming to terms with the fact that the summer is ending and that he'll be leaving soon. So traumatizing for a child, but more of a sad way than a scary one. Disney took the general gist of these stories and added a film-style length to them. When Disney initially adapted these stories for Pooh and the Blustery Day, they took a similar approach. But the initial Pooh Disney stories were way more cartoony in terms of their approach. Basically, heavily Disney-fied in some ways. On a similar scale, they initially kept the imaginary aspects of Heffalumps and Woozles, with the song in the original Pooh and Tigger basically being a reworking of the classic Pink Elephants on Parade. But actual Heffalumps appear in later Pooh stories, and the implication is that it's all a misunderstanding, and they're never as bad as characters have made them out to be. Like in the case of Pooh's Heffalumps movie, or The New Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. Heffalumps and Woozles even go on to represent Baker's capitalist and capitalism in the live-action Christopher Robin, which is actually a pretty apt description about that, if you think about it. The other thing about Pooh Disney adaptations is they add on more adventure, as in the case of the aforementioned Pooh's Grand Adventure, which takes elements of these more stories and gives them actual stakes and edge, at least by Pooh standards. The Skullosaurus, the implied monster of the film in Pooh's Grand Adventure, is never once actually seen or shown, but its presence is felt throughout. It makes for a story that is not just scary, but very daunting. It's a classic Pooh villain in that it comes from the imagination, but unlike, say, Heffalumps or Woozles, or even the Bacchus, the movie doesn't go out of its way to imply it's real. From a child perspective, you're waiting for that dinosaur-sounding creature to pop its head out and attack the other main characters. Even the animation fits perfectly in this complex. The forest that Pooh have to travel through looks like a dark forest akin to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, which is actually really, really terrifying if you think about it. Especially for a frightening scene for a young child. This is why Pooh's Grand Adventure stands out for me. The mood, the atmosphere, everything else, it just feels so much more different than what you're used to seeing out of the 100-Acre Woods. While other Winnie the Pooh movies or stories too have darker, disturbing elements, the Tigger movie, for example, is a surprisingly existential story about being the only one of your type. There's never not a sense that everything will be fine in the end. It's a movie with a lot of jokes and heartfelt moments that you'd expect from a classic Pooh story, but in an extremely dusty and much less friendly manner. I think what makes a difference compared to other Winnie the Pooh stories is a lack of Roo or even Kanga. Roo is generally the little kid character that is there to provide some heartwarming moments and to point out the misunderstandings. For example, he's used in the Tigger movie as a character for Tigger to talk to, and is used in a similar way in Pooh's Heffalumps movie, where he is the character who ends up befriending the Heffalump. With Roo out of the picture, while the movie doesn't become less child-friendly, it does feel like there's less of a child character for the intended young audience to grab onto, or push for more heartwarming moments, and thus, the movie feels a bit less, shall we say, safe. In addition to not feeling safe, the movie has several moments of just downright torture by Pooh standards. Eeyore doesn't just lose his tail, he nearly loses his entire life, and the gang falls into a waterfall where they encounter all sorts of, by childhood standards, paranoia. Man, if this movie didn't have the more cutesy elements of Pooh, I could see this being a solid animated 80s kids movie, where there's elements of darkness around every corner. I think it's what I appreciated about this movie as I've gotten older. It doesn't really hold back. I remember watching the Tigger movie in theaters and absolutely enjoying it. I remember watching Piglet's Big Movie and not necessarily finding anything wrong about it from a young man's perspective. But the first time I watched Pooh's Grand Adventure, while I loved it, it also left me with a feeling of dread. It might have been because I was so young, but as a Pooh story, it definitely stands out more in my mind. From a Winnie the Pooh perspective, it's very much a way more sinister story with a made-up antagonist that actually resembles a real character, but a resolution that makes everyone seem happy. If Winnie the Pooh stories are about anything, it's about the innocence of childhood and friends, and Pooh's Grand Adventure has many points to it that relate to this. It's about learning to overcome the darkness that we're eventually all scared of. As a young kid, that message hit me super hard, without my youthful brain even realizing it. But as an adult, it somehow hits me even harder. It makes me remember how dark my seemingly innocent childhood could actually be. This may be me overthinking what's inherently supposed to be a film for children, with a friendly, happy message, with friendly, happy songs, but as a YouTuber who does analytical essays of this sort, that's exactly what I'm here to do. And in the words of everyone's favorite yellow bear, oh bother!